Hello, and welcome to this episode of Industry Insights. Today, we are going to discuss the global capability centers, a phenomenon which has certainly come mainstream not right now, but over the past few decades. But what's been observed all around is the fact that India today houses more than 50% of the Global Capability Center, or GCCs as we call it, for Fortune 500 companies. In order to discuss this phenomenon, our guest today is Karthik Padmanabhan from Zinnov. Karthik is at the midst of all of this entire transformation which is happening, and we thought we'll use this opportunity to discuss as to what are the enablers and how to take it forward. Welcome, Karthik.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. Great to be here to discuss, I think, what you just called out is a phenomenon that's been in there for 30 years. But in the last probably 5-6 years, it's really taken off. So great to be here to discuss that with you, Prakash.
So, Karthik, my own research in GCCs seems to suggest there are phases through which GCCs move up the value chain. Now, we have models around over here. Your counterparts in the industry and your competitors, all of us have our different models.
Right.
There's a 5-stage model. I kind of simplify it in the form of a 3-stage model. How do you folks at Zinnov look at the evolution of GCCs?
And therefore, we have a 4-stage model.
Perfect.
Right? So we have a 4-stage model that we typically call as what we know as an outpost center, which is probably what most of the centers started off with. That moved into a satellite center. And a satellite center is something which is going up in value, fundamentally, right? So more from a staff augmentation center, but more into a delivery kind of a model, right? So they really become good in delivery, strong in execution. The third stage is where what we call as a portfolio center. And portfolio center drives a lot more ownership and accountability. So the centers now have decision-making ability, the ability for them to own entire portfolios, own product lines, and drive it out of that.
So what percentage of GCCs in India do you think are at the third stage?
So the majority of them, when we characterize the 1,600 centers in India today, the majority of them are in that satellite and portfolio hub.
That's
right?
what all
so
our
right
records
in
seem to
that
suggest.
middle, and we've seen that wave move right from being an outpost to a satellite to a portfolio. And the fourth one is what we call a transformative center. We'll get to the transformative center, but the majority of them today, so close to almost 50% of them, are either towards satellite to a portfolio or on the cusp of the intersection of the two of them. It's probably what we say.
So between 2 and 3.
Between 2 and 3.
Wow. That's a bit of a aggressive outlook compared to what other data seems to suggest. But let's move on to your fourth center.
Correct.
So there is a roadmap for moving on to these the portfolio centers, as you called it out. But what did you mean by the transformative sector?
Excellent. And there are a few, and not too many, but there are a few, about 5 or 6 of them, who have actually made it into the transformative center. The way I look at it, Prakash, is when you go to a transformative center, the line called a GCC gets erased. They are not called as a GCC anymore because they have become an integral fabric of how the global organization really operates, right? So then they don't look at that as an India center or a GCC center or capability center. It's a Bangalore center or Hyderabad center in the way that we actually operates. But more so because it has now got the capability to transform the headquarters itself, or transform business models, transform the way that they're working with customers, so creation of new products. So they are able to look at, let's say, ideation to conception, looking at prototyping, testing that prototyping, work with customers, and creating products that come out of that could be potentially transformative.
So it's transformative for whom?
Transformative for their business, transformative for their customers, transformative in terms of how technology is being used to create new products.
So transformative for the company in general.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess there's a fine line, but let me pick up one of the points which you said, 5 or 6 is the number you said, out of 1,600. Okay. The way we have generally called out are those units which start off as being an outpost or taking care of particular aspects of the business in order to drive efficiency, and then move on to being product units or an integral part of the business. Now, transformation is where you're driving business transformation or you're transforming yourself out in terms of a separate entity and seeking out new markets for
I'll give you an
yourself.
example, right? So take Bosch as an example. Now, Bosch has been here for a long time. But today, if you walk into a Bosch center, they are able to now create products out there. The ideas for what are the products that is being used globally, those ideas are coming out of here, right?
Yeah, and Bosch was the one I would have also talked about simply because Bosch also went out and started doing business for others. It stopped
Absolutely.
being a captive.
Correct.
So let's hone in onto this particular group, even though it's five or six. And it need not be aspirational for every GCC to say, how can we go and create a separate business for ourselves? But the fact that you, as a consequence, able to drive value for the organization itself is the moot point. So,
Correct.
what are the enablers which allow this to happen, or based on your studies, seem to suggest that this transformation can take place?
There are many factors to it, right? Let's start right at the top. And right at the top, we have the leadership angle, right? When we actually studied all of the 1600 centers over there, and then we looked at the extent of leadership, and we called something called as a leadership density, for example. So how much of your organization's leaders, global organizations, tech leaders, are actually sitting within your center in India, for example. And that's what we call as a ratio between global leaders to how many we have here.
In tech, you also called it tech
Yeah.
leaders.
Typically, we are looking at tech leaders, for example, but it could be business leaders, it could be domain leaders, it could be SMEs, it could be anything. But typically, when we did the study, we looked at the comparison between transformative, so the organizations that have moved down into a path of being transformative hubs, and then looked at the leadership density within them. We saw a perceptible difference. We saw a difference. Like, I'd like to quote Dipesh Shah from Samsung, right? And he's the global R&D leader who works out of Bangalore here and leads the R&D hub in Bangalore for Samsung. And he calls it accumulated experience, meaning that his center in Samsung has become great, world's class, world's best within Samsung in a certain area of product, right? So in that particular area, he has been able to drive experience, expertise, knowledge, having been SMEs in it, to call that as accumulated experience, that they know now that in Bangalore, in Samsung, they are the leaders in that particular
So,
space.
transformative leadership, rather than abstracting it at the organizational wide level, is for specific capabilities or
That is
businesses?
correct. That is exactly correct.
That makes a bit, yeah, that sets up very well. So then it's just not leadership. Let's take the same Samsung example. If they have accumulated leadership in a particular domain,
Correct.
what are the other factors which allowed them to get over there?
Great question. So when I look at leadership itself, it's not any kind of leadership. It's something that we call systems leadership. And systems leadership is not a new term. It's been there because we have had systems thinking, systems processes, and then we have got systems leadership, which really is leadership that allows leaders to actually operate in duality, operate in the intersections of multiple things. Like, for example, they have to operate in the intersection between technology and business. They have to operate in the intersection of onshore and offshore, between architecture, product development, and customer experience, for example. I'll give you an example of that as well. Somebody who's sitting in India, for instance, and here creating, let's say, a data architecture or creating a data lake, for instance, they should be able to correlate that to say, by doing so, how am I able to have faster supply chain? How can I have goods being transported much faster?
Classical systems thinking.
Right.
So you're kind of converging systems thinking at the leadership level.
That is exactly
Okay,
correct.
let's move from the leadership aspect. What other factors have enabled organizations and specifically GCCs in India to traverse to your fourth stage?
Correct. We kind of touched upon it a little bit, right? In the sense that the whole idea of product, right? And products being created out of India are therefore for consumers to experience it. And therefore, customer centricity, customer experience, and product management, product thinking are all interwoven. So if India is able to then use product management as an area, earlier, India was great in execution. India has really earned its spot by saying that we are wonderful delivery houses.
Or efficiency, as you would call it.
Efficiency, technology leadership, the ability to deliver, the ability to have harness technology to go create and make great products, but not necessarily think about what the next products are going to be. That is now starting to happen within the India domain.
Okay, so now you are able to transform the product aspect, and you kind of explained it under the banner of customer centricity, which
Correct.
kind of might confuse us because if you really look at it, a significant portion, and I won't go into exact numbers, of these 1600 GCCs are from sectors which may not have a direct presence in India. Retail is a classical example. BFSI, most of the banks or insurance companies of the Western world,
Sure.
and specifically US, since two-thirds of the US GCCs are in
Correct.
India, don't have a presence over here. So there seems to be an anomaly between this idea of customer centricity and how can you be customer centric when you are in a context or in a market where I don't have customers.
Sure. It's a great question, right? So let's examine this a little bit. Where it's actually easier to do, or where your tech houses are. So your Googles, Microsofts, Adobes, for example, right? For them, looking at products, for instance, right? And how are they looking at product
Yeah, we are
management?
the world's second largest or the largest market already for them. So I can
Absolutely.
understand a Google and a Facebook.
So that's your
Yeah.
that's your aspect where we have actually done it, walked that path, doing extremely well, and continuing to do so, right? And then we have aspects where India itself is a market, right? So where we have India as a market for the same producers over here. Like for example, if you take an insurance firm that actually works over here, we also have the same.
We get that too. But what about a Walmart, a Target,
Exactly.
a TIAA, or any of the insurance hubs?
Yeah.
Those who don't really have a specific presence over here.
And that's the next frontier. So today, that's a space which I don't think has been fully enabled yet. So sometimes I use the term a proxy for a customer, right? So how do we have a proxy for a customer? So how do we have the teams in India really understand and empathize with how a customer or a consumer needs, and how do we replicate that so that we can start thinking through their lens? Some companies have set up studios, for example, right? So they have actually been able to create studios. Some people have gone ahead and create full replicated business processes and have an immersive understanding of how the business processes operates. But that's still a work in progress, right? That's
The
not.
business process is still back end. One would get it. And if you had told me that customer centricity for the internal customer, we get it because I think you have the complete business process and you have your lens into that. You have your probes into that. But what about the end customer? So if we break this customer centricity into two parts, let's first take the internal part of it.
Sure.
Because this is where I would say Indian GCCs have excelled.
Sure.
What do you think have been the drivers over there?
The first driver is the domain understanding. So today, when I walk into, let's say, a healthcare GCC, for example, I walk into a Thrive Digital or a Carillon, for instance, they know the domain in and out, right? So they've actually understood how a claims processing would work, or how a patient record should be handled, or what are the intricacies of a HIPAA regulation, for instance, right? What is information? So those kind of aspects, which hitherto was not understood very well, now has become an integral part of how a center would operate, because they understand that this particular vertical, this industry, this domain has certain specificities that they need to understand and incorporate. That training happens. Right?
And this ties up with your accumulated
That is correct.
knowledge built over a period of time.
That is correct.
So there is the GCC in India itself has created this knowledge center which is able to build upon its own capabilities.
You'd be surprised. You should be able to go to an insurance customer or a healthcare customer. They will be able to talk to you about health regulations in the US as much as somebody who's in the US right now, which makes them more easier to work with for their US counterparts. So they are not yet necessarily customer facing, but for that internal colleague or their peer who's sitting across the shore, they know that both of them speak the same language, right? And therefore, the ability to trust the organization over here in India to make decisions around product features, prioritization, rollouts becomes much easier.
And this is something which would be more than 5, I would think, certainly.
Quite of them. All of them. I
Much
think
more.
a number of them in
So
the
this would
portfolio.
still fall into the third phase of
That is
what you
correct.
call out, or what I call out somewhere between 2 and 3, 2.5.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the other part of customer centricity, which is your end customer, and particularly in a market, leaving aside the Googles and the Metas of the world, where you don't have access to that customer because you're not catering to the local customer. And let's be honest, a significant part of Western MNCs, more specifically American MNCs, have not succeeded in setting up markets in India at an effective manner. So, how do you think the local GCC can actually enable customer centricity with the context of the end customer coming into their operating model?
So, opening up newer markets is something which not many GCCs are tasked to do today, but those are things that we are seeing that happen, right? We are talking to a couple of organizations that are saying we have set up a center here, which are completely right now potentially cost centers, but can they become revenue centers, right? Can they actually move into the chain of being saying, hey, can we have customer operations in India, Asia Pacific? Can that be driven out of India, for
Are there
example?
some examples or case studies which you use over there to explain to them how they will do it?
There are a few, but not that many where we can actually call that as a, oh, okay, that shift has actually happened.
No, we can't. But are there some role models for people to emulate?
Not one that I can immediately go ahead and tell you about, but certainly we see that winds of change happening where we're talking about what kind of changes can be happen, and I do believe there may not be too many of them, but there will be a few. Like a Walmart, for example, I don't think we'll have an India operations in the near future. I'm not actually sure whether that will actually ever happen, but potentially it
Well,
can.
on paper they have, and then they have Flipkart. But
Of course, of course.
but let's probe a bit deeper into this aspect. Why do you think that has not happened? If I really call the final North Star for a GCC to be a transformation center, why is it that the GCC is not able to enable access to new markets or new ways of or business models?
If the global headquarters do have that strategy in place, that will 100% happen. And that's not because of a lack of capability. It's more of a global strategy that needs to enable that, right?
So this points to a bit of a disconnect between global strategy and GCC strategy.
Not at all, not at all. So GCCs today are in place because of what I call as typically the three T's, which is your talent is your number one enablers for why they come into India. The second is the aspect of technology and how they can leverage technology for that, which is so talent is a big take, technology is a big take, transformation from a headquarters point of view is also a big take. So I think all of the vision, the reasons, the why centers are in India today, those are just continuing to grow. Now we are adding another dimension saying that, hey, do you think that they should expand operations in Asia Pacific? Do you think they should expand operations in India as a market by itself for an organization that's not necessarily been here? Like, for example, let's take we took Walmart and Flipkart as an example, but you can take Verizon as another example if you want to. Now, would they start an India operations in some particular way? It's not a GCC question to answer. That's a question more from a global strategy that needs to answer, and GCCs could be a part of that answer. Right?
No, and maybe they don't need to, like the Verizon example which you gave. But the disconnect over there is we're still calling it a GCC. If it's a transformation hub for the organization, then it should be part of the organizational strategy setting.
Which I think on the tech side is already happening. You look at Microsoft, or
But we
Google.
can't dissociate the tech and the rest of the business part of it also in the same space. And that's where I think there are examples of GCCs who have managed to converge their thinking of an integrated business, who have moved ahead. And you don't always need to be in a particular market to figure out what am I going to learn. But the fact remains that we are today in the world's largest market, and as Asia Pacific, we are the ones driving transformation, and no organization in today's day and age can remain oblivious to what's happening around.
Which is
the
awesome,
way.
Prakash, right? Which basically meant that all of the reasons that the GCCs are here for, or the India centers are here for, we've been able to accomplish. And now we're looking for newer frontiers to conquer and always bring on the challenge. I'm sure the centers here are more than up to the challenge.
No, so that's great set of discussions. What else do you think GCCs could do in terms of driving their growth forward?
Yeah. There are two aspects of it, which is, I think the centers in here, because they're all close together, aspects that were not earlier brought together are being brought together right now. So one is between tech and operations. Earlier, operations used to sit separately, technology used to sit separately. Now we can see them coming together, and you're able to see a single value chain. And a single value chain drives better efficiency, drives better experience, drives end-to-end work behavior, for example, end-to-end visibility into how things are actually happening. So those kind of things we are seeing more and more happening. Earlier, there used to be a BPO center or a knowledge center, for example. There used to be a technology center. Bringing them together, and that's happening over here, is actually driving better organizational integration, even from a headquarters standpoint. The second is the ecosystem, right? And today's ecosystem in India is vibrant. There are a number of startups that are actually happening over here. So centers are also now looking for working with ecosystems and saying, how can we better improve our products over here? Is there any idea out there that we can actually incorporate into it? And there are so many different models that they're working with, right? We know of organizations like a Honeywell, for example, who's more than happy to work with startups, invest in startups if we need to, right? Not just work with them, but actually invest in them, saying, okay, bring me some things. There are organizations who have gone down the acquire-hire path. They've gone ahead and acquired the entire organization so that we can harness their entire talent and that's ability over there. So working with the ecosystem. And I've also, one more thing that I've also noticed is that GCCs today are almost unafraid to share their best practices. Right? They are happy to go and talk about what's working for them, what's not working for them with their peer group. Right? And so we run ecosystem collaborations, we run roundtables, we run where we get center heads together and talk about, okay, how does this work for you? Is this a new technology? Have you tried it? And they're unafraid to actually share some of that information.
It's surprising that you say that. And even we have had the opportunity to host quite a few GCC roundtables over the course. I personally must have hosted a half a dozen of them. And it's interesting to see how they are waiting for a catalyst to help them come together and talk about it. Now, we are not in the business of doing that, but I'm surprised none of you and your competitors have taken this path a bit more aggressively.
No. So we are in that business, and we are doing that more and more. And what we are seeing encourages us to even do more further. Right? So we actually bring that up on a common topic, let them talk. And we're actually seeing that they are actually wanting that entire ecosystem to come up. They're not just talking about, hey, how do I succeed or how does this particular GCC do well? They recognize that if the entire ecosystem rises, they rise along with it, right? So we are seeing mentorship programs being run. They are more than happy to invite a new entrant to come in. Like, for example, yesterday, it was, if I'm not mistaken, we took some of our new potential entrants to India to 2 other GCCs. Both of them welcomed them in, opened their doors, spoke about what is working for them, what is not working for them, and guide them along the way. So that's another part in terms of how the ecosystem is actually fostering itself to a large degree.
Karthik, let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
Okay. A lot of this discussion and the current excitement on GCCs invariably boils down to the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. But business is much more than these organizations. And are we effectively saying that the India opportunity is only there for large corporates to look into? What can a mid-sized business or what can one of the great family-run organizations from Europe look at in terms of their Indian opportunity? Maybe not as a market only, but also in terms of how for them to leverage their business efficiencies as well as transformation better.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this question, because if you really look at the advent of centers, the big ones, the Fortune 500 ones, a large part of them are already here. And they've been here for, I don't know, almost 15 years.
It's interesting that you say that. You know, a couple of months ago, I was asked to join a GCC which was just setting up, one of the major chains from US. And the entire leadership team was there. And I had the opportunity to ask them, so what brought you over here now? And he said, you know what? We had been debating it for the last almost a decade, and we finally said, let's do it. So it seemed like the FOMO factor. If they're not here, they better be here.
And the fact that they've been debating it for a decade.
A decade,
right?
Yeah.
So the thought has been there for the last 10 years. So for the large ones, it was never a question of if, it was only a question of when.
When.
Right?
Or how, or why.
And how and when, exactly. Or maybe to a degree where. Right. It's also it should not be assumed that India is the only destination for a center. There are a lot of places out there that they can actually go into. But now, if you look at the last 6 to 8 years, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, the number of organizations, and these are not a billion plus, this could be anywhere between a 500 million, 700 million kind of organizations. And they are coming in here, and they are coming in here with a refreshing difference. So they are not traversing this path of let me go through an outpost satellite portfolio and transformation. They are setting up tech hubs, R&D hubs right from the word go. Right, they're setting up product management right from the word go. They're looking at customer centricity right from the word go. Right, and those are the kind of organizations. Some of our customers, like a HMH, for example, it's an EdTech which is Boston-based, for example. Their product lines are getting developed out of here, right, and that's great to see because those are the ones who are driving the market up right now. They're driving leadership over here. They're driving product management. They're driving design, user experience being driven from here.
I think what you said actually opens our minds to a very different way of looking at it. Typically, whenever we say evolution, industry evolution, etc., it's like you start by riding a tricycle and then you finally move on. But what you said sounds like there are GCCs who are coming up and straight away wanting to get into the F1 car and zoom ahead. And that's a great example. Why don't we talk more about these?
Absolutely, we should. We should get these stories out there. We should have a number of such stories that are actually out there. There we are saying, hey, let's just get a jump start on all of this. Lessons have been learned. Best practices are out there. We have playbooks for how to do these. It's a coming of making sure that we come in here, get the talent, get the center up. And I think locations like, let's say, a Hyderabad or a Bangalore, in the two locations, when they come in here, the location itself tells a story. Right, they come in for a week. They look at the place. They look at how many centers are being set up. Look at how are they setting it up. They get the excitement. They get the vibe. They understand that okay, you know what? It's not a big deal. We can actually get it done. And then once the sponsorship happens, leadership buy-in happens, let's get going. Right. So
great. Thank you, Karthik. This was a very interesting discussion. You shared with us your perspectives and experiences, and I hope it helped our audience today recognize that the GCC story has certainly moved a long way ahead. And whereas we are focusing on some aspects of the story, there are lots of subplots around which are far more interesting and perhaps provide a different perspective for an organization to craft its own growth story over here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prakash, for having me. I should just say that we are still getting started. There are 1,700 GCCs in India. There are still another 90% of organizations out there who are still looking to come in here. So this story is just getting started.
My view is kind of similar, but for a different reason. There are 1,700 GCCs out here, but together they contribute less than a couple of percentage points to our GDP. And for GCCs to really create an impact, they have to see also in terms of how do they really move up the value chain.
Absolutely.
So on that note, thank you, Karthik.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Such a pleasure talking to you.
Same here.